Hey everybody, welcome to another build video. In this one we are going to upgrade this 2004 Cannondale Gemini. So this comes with 170 suspension front, 170 rear with 26-inch wheels and 3x drivetrain. And we are going to utilize this huge range of motion up front and convert this into a mullet setup, basically 27.5 wheels front. So I'm going to reduce the travel, use a 130 27.5 inch fork up front, and that way I can still get a 27.5 inch wheel without changing the head angle, the seat tube angle, or increasing the bottom bracket height. The beauty of these Cannondale bikes is the large head tube. Now they used 1.5 inch forks originally, so now I'll be using some adapters, and I can just put in a modern steer tube. Starting with the upgrades in the rear, so I'm using Shimano brakes as well as rotors, XTR brakes and rotors. So the bike comes with a 12 through axle. So I should be able to utilize a 142 wheel, 12 by 142 wheel and tubeless setup in the future. So in terms of the shock, it's a 200 by 50 with a titanium coil rated at 400 pounds. And I did install a dropper post, nothing fancy. It's a entry-level Kitsuma 1 90 travel. I utilized what was once the front derailleur routing path to route the dropper post cable. Now, in terms of the head tube, it's 52 up top and 52 bottom. Because it's such a big head tube on the top, we need some sort of adapter, and we'll get to that soon. But yeah, we need some sort of adapter up top to reduce the diameter. Now here's a different angle on the bike, and you can see that on the rear we are going with the 1x drivetrain essentially, and on the rear you see an Advantex 9-speed cassette, which 11 to 46 teeth. Going with 9-speed because primarily for the cost, I don't mind losing a little bit of range in between. Now the rear derailleur has clutch, and it's made by Advantex as well, and same thing with the shifter. Now the shock mounts have two holes, 150 and 170 because this coil shock has a reservoir at the bottom, I have to leave it at 150 for clearance sake. It also turns out 150 gives you the best climbing ability. Now the bottom bracket is 68 does have ISG mounts, so at some point in the future I'll be installing the bash guards. The nice thing about these Cannondale bikes is these routing ports that are already present. They just make the bike look really clean. And the white part that you saw on the bearings is grease. I just put them ahead of time, that way I don't have to do it while I'm taking the video. Okay, here we are installing the bottom bracket. Because it's a 68 frame at the bottom, we need two washers on the drive side, and I'm using a BB93 bottom bracket. Now on the non-drive side, we will install one washer, and in terms of tightening them, there is markings already on the bottom bracket, but in case, if you want to remember, if you hold the wrench at 12 o'clock position, you need to move it towards your rear wheel. It's the same on both the sides. Hold the wrench at 12 o'clock position and move it towards the rear wheel. And you don't need to over tighten them. It's, I believe, the same torque setting as your oil drain pan. So as soon as you feel resistance, those spacers are aluminum spacers, so you don't want to crush them. As soon as you feel good resistance that it's not turning, that's good enough. So maybe one good grunt, and that should be good enough. In terms of the cranks, we are going with Shimano XT 170 and I've installed a wolf tooth oval chainring 32 to 30. And the bottom bracket, the BB93 bottom bracket is already greased. So as I'm installing this spindle, there shouldn't be any resistance, but it should slide smoothly. Now as you install the non-drive side, there is a retaining clip. You want to put that in open position, and as always, definitely apply some grease on the splines. Now here's the retaining clip that's lifted up into open position. Once you slide the crank arm in, you can then close the retaining clip, which should be flush to the surface, and then tighten the bolts. Okay, now before we tighten the bolts, there is one more step. There is a compression cap. You just need to finger tighten it. It's going to remove any slack that may be present. Again, there's a special tool that we'll use in the final turns, and again, it just need to be finger tightened. You don't need to really go hard on it. Now if you tighten this compression cap too much, you'll actually find that it's a little bit harder to spin the crank arms freely. Okay, with that step done, we are going to finally tighten the two bolts that are on either side of the non-drive side crank arm. So once you start feeling resistance, you need to stop and start alternating the two bolts as you tighten them. That way you're not creating any pinch points. So just a quarter of turn on one bolt, switch to the other bolt, and keep repeating the process. Now the torque settings on this is 11 Newton meters. And if you don't have a torque wrench, you can just do it by hand. I've been doing it by hand for a while and never had any issues. Okay, here's the interesting part back again. So the head tube is a 52 mm internal diameter up top and bottom. So on the bottom, we don't have an issue with the modern steerer tube. You can just buy, I just bought an IS 52 mm bottom bearing, and it's fitting just fine. So now on the top, in order to reduce the diameter, I first put in an IS 52 mm bearing, and then on top of it, I then purchased a 45 by 31.5 bearing. And that's going to sit into it. Because the bearings are tapered, they seem to, at the center point, it seems to sit into the slot. There is a little bit of slide, but you can, and you'll see that in a little bit as we tighten the top cap, that's taken out as the bearing finds its center place. Now initially, as you're putting the handle in there, you'll see that it's a little bit crooked because the steerer tube is not at the center of the head tube currently, and there is no way for us to do that initially because the bearing just keeps sliding. But as you tighten the top cap, because the bearing is tapered, it just goes into the center, and the steerer tube automatically moves into the center of the head tube. Here's after the installation. You can see that the top cap is pretty much flush and at the center, indicating that the bearing is at the center of the head tube, and so is the steerer tube. Now once that's done, you'll just tighten up the clamp bolts for your stem, so that should hold everything in place. And remember, the top bearing barely takes any load, so this should work just fine. At this point, I'm just tightening the brake levers and the dropper post levers, and I usually don't over tighten them. I just tighten them to a point wherein I should be able to move them freely with my hand. That way, even if there's a fall, the brake lever just moves out of the way rather than braking. As always, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video.